It starts usually with some leadership. And the problem is, David alluded to it immediately, is it still ends up for 15 years later, depending on whether you get lucky.
Yes.
All right? And that's crazy. I mean, think about any other work in the world whose quality would depend on whether these folks who change constantly like each other. All right? And so we all know that's not sufficient. And so if you look at then what happens, there's a pattern in which you get a little bit of development and you start choosing something you can do together. And the IBB process is really interesting because it's a process to get to something where you know the early questions that start in a more collaborative fashion. So you actually start to invite the union leadership's input, and then you start to invite into a more concrete, if you will, projects that have implementation. It isn't just getting their advice, but maybe asking them for actual decision making with you in some sort of joint fashion, and all of that. So it starts to move if you're lucky and you have the leadership and you build it out. The piece I want to add, it really too, Portland just crosses a piece right now, and we don't have it in Providence, but it's the two big systems in the room that you can see kind of wrestling with it up here in front of you. And that is to say that I think it's really helpful to do two systemic pieces, one of which got open today, which is to say, can you build in a low trust environment a high trust kind of language, and where do you build it? And the safest place to build it, if you can, is, and it skirts the lawyers in many ways, which is to say, don't tell them you're building it into contract language, but tell them you're building into a preamble. All right? It's the old, it's a trick out of the private sector that says before the contract starts with all of the rights and responsibilities and so forth, write a general high trust 3 paragraphs, for God's sakes, about how you want to live together. All right? The lawyers know you can't go anywhere with that. But it does say something about the fact that at one point in time you said that and you might renew it and so forth and so on, so that it gives you a piece of paper. Now this is a really weird thing, because this is like a prenup agreement between two 55-year-olds and then through it. All right? All right? You want to get in and get out. Because if you start to say, oh, wait a minute, because this is where you go. Oh, wait a minute, what does this mean that you have the right to do and what I have the right to do? And you say, don't do it, because you'll start saying, who owns what if this crashes? All right? That's not an activity. That you're trying to do just the opposite, which is to say, high trust, openness, and so forth. But it really does help to do that. The second thing that really helps is to build a weird thing called a structure. And it's weird in the sense that it does make the lawyers nervous, right? And that is to say that you build some sort of a collaborative overall structure. Now see, we're pretty good at doing that to the principals. We say, you're going to have an ILT. You're going to have an instructional leadership team, and you'll work with those teachers, and they say, does it make decisions or don't? And they're immediately into the set of questions around that. So what does a district leadership team do? Because we're building one in Portland. You can hear it. They're talking about it. They did training this week on it and so forth. All right? I think its job is not so much to do anything to anybody, strange as that may sound. I think its job is to build what and I know it's metaphorical in many ways, your job is to build a we. Your job is to basically say, we may not own this whole thing, we may not very good, but we basically talk constantly about how we're doing. How's it going is the best question you can ask. And the basic activity of this, I think, if I'm the consultant servicing it, if you will, is to say, just get them to basically do a fairly formal set of listening around how it's going, site by site, group by group. I don't care what the hell they're doing as long as they're listening together. And the fundamental shift there is that they actually have a view that's common of the same reality. Because I made a living for 20 years basically going in and asking, Sue alluded to it. So the management always knows what the good stuff is. The union always knows what the bad stuff is, but nobody knows what the stuff is. And they pay me big bucks to go in and say, in their system where they've lived for 30 years, here's what's happening after 5 days of interviews. And they pay me $25,000, $30,000 with a team to do that. You say, what am I doing here? And what you're actually doing is helping them Doesn't matter the data I get. The activity is when I pull them together and say, here's what I heard. When they basically say, oh, that's what you heard, and they deny it and they fight me and so on and so on, they actually, out of that process, begin to reach some sort of coherent map of actually what they do own, whether they like it or not. Right? They stop denying each other's data, you stop denying each other's data, and so forth. It's a big deal, because if you want to build ultimately a culture, right, down here in which your instinct is to do it jointly, you must build some place where you have the ability to listen together to how you are doing, and they will tell you. They won't tell you the truth early. Go out to the sites, tell them they have to lie for 40 minutes or 20 minutes, and then tell you the truth. Do anything to get them to begin to tell you the truth. Right? They will if they see it not used against them, and if they see it in some senses kind of used to learn and redesign and rethink, they will begin to tell more and more of the truth to you. So the first thing is I would build some language. The second thing is I would build a structure, because both of them say some sort of stability and movement this way. And the last piece I stole from Mike Wheaton many years ago, and it basically still holds true. Right? And that is to say, what should you do? And it sounds simple, it is not. What should you do with this information around the picture? The how are you doing? And what you ought to do is you ought to broadcast it. Right? You ought to just simply say, we were out in such and such a middle school last week, and we were asking questions around this. They are not doing well with respect to this, and they are not happy with us around this. They're doing this really well, and so forth. When you do that, what you basically say is, first of all, publicly, you actually declare that you are a couple. You go public, you come out. Right? And when you come out, it's very hard to get back. Almost impossible. Right? And so in some senses, now you're out. Right? And in some senses, you say, we. And you actually force yourself to say, we were out. And when you say, this is what is happening there, you say, this is what's happening to us. Right? But the real issue is that when you do that, you change the culture of everybody's ownership around the work. Just think about it for a minute. It is, in some senses, all right, the basic activity of listening and saying it out loud that heals the thing, that changes its ability to do deeper and deeper work. Something very weird about it, all right, but it in some senses allows all of these folks who don't experience this. See, the danger of this model is that it never moves below here. And that doesn't give you, because what happens is you move a little bit down here, all right? And then all of a sudden you've got a union leader or a management who start to do something really interesting, like this redesign without times for a professional day. Well, if this group hasn't come journeyed years with you, but if they haven't made some deep kind of journey with you, they'll never give you permission to do the next step. So what this thing does, if you don't build that kind of understanding and experience that we are making a journey and we're telling the truth and we're telling the truth about the bad stuff and the good, they'll never let you move below here. Ever. They'll never give you permission. No matter how courageous you are, smart, innovative, and so forth, because they're not experiencing what you are, right? And they don't trust it. So you have to somehow have a strategy to keep saying, this is where we are, this is what we're learning. If you do it, when you inch down here and you ask permission, which you almost ultimately always must, right? Whether you have the authority or not in votes, you eventually have to say, this is what we are thinking of doing. They will only let you go so far as they've made the journey. Let me say it again. You can't go any further than you've helped them make the journey. Now, it all sounds like tricks, but in some senses, nobody knows, nobody does this. Everybody says, well, we got lucky. Or somebody says, well, we're doing this, and we're doing this, and that's called best practice, because we have good stories and anecdotes. Or somebody says, we're thinking about putting it in 3 paragraphs in front of the contract. Or somebody says, we're going to take the risk of building a structure here despite the lawyer. But what you really want to do is, what the hell is the activity? And it is deep listening that creates some sort of growing, incremental understanding that we are in it together and it is our work and our responsibility. And when you do that, you allow the folks who do the work to begin to experience the same thing. Otherwise, interesting enough, and the beautiful organic kind of nature of this thing is, they won't let you go any further. They simply will they'll just pull it back. And very few systems get below here. And the difference, of course, of the so-called private sector piece is they have a much more authoritarian model, not nearly as democratic, not nearly as open and so forth, but the danger of it is that it's a good deal of false movement. They come back so fast and take your breath away when the authority goes away. And you're not trying for that, you're trying for this. And I guess the last piece, and the most beautiful piece about this that we really haven't done a very good job in, is if we're moving to here, what this really means is we still have this wonderful movement from teacher to learner. That is to say that the real ownership and the real we aren't even close many of us. There's magic teachers in here that do it with 20 kids in a closed room. But the question is, do we create a place where the learning is ours? And the only way you do that is to listen to them constantly, as you do. You know, if you're really good at this, you keep saying, how are we doing? Mm-hmm. And it's an authentic enough question that it's not dangerous to put up your hand and say, I don't get this isn't working, and so forth. And so all I'm really saying is this leads to actually deep, authentic teaching and learning here, which is the purpose anyway. So I want to come back and grab the morning. Because the morning is, in some senses, look at what we're going to do. Why not, for the next 3 years, create a structure like this? Don't panic the lawyers. Say, well, we're just going to listen to our work around Common Core. And we're just going to go move through the system constantly in every event where it's natural. And we're going to say, how the hell are we doing? And then listen for a couple of hours and publish the results of the system, inside and out. Because the other interesting piece, and this is the last row, it isn't just the internal system that will stop you from doing high-risk, deep collaborative work. If the external system hasn't come with you in terms of community and parents, and they don't trust you to do the same kind of thing and work that way, they simply will self-arrest you as well. So it's really an interesting organic